Welcome to Teaching Truth. It was on a dark, cold, wet and windy night that the waves of Lake Erie, almost an ocean in itself, hissed and curled against the base of the inner lighthouse near Cleveland, Ohio. As the night deepened, a violent storm hurled itself across Lake Erie, a storm that could toss great ships as if they were toys and smash them against the shorelines with terrifying and deadly menace. And as the storm grew in intensity, into roaring mountains of turbulent waves and screaming winds, a desperate captain stood beside the wheel of his ship. Near to him stood an old pilot, also straining his eyes into the ominous darkness of the night. Underneath, the ship heaved and creaked, and the wooden decks were slippery with water. The captain squinted into the darkness. "Are you sure this is Cleveland?" he asked the pilot. "Quite sure, sir," replied the pilot, his hands clamped fast upon the wheel. "But where are the lower lights?" "They are out, sir." "Can you make it?" asked the captain. "We must, sir," replied the pilot, "or we'll perish." There was nothing else they could do. Desperately, the old pilot tried to find his way into the channel without the lights that should have been there and visible that night. But the sea, in its intensity, pulverized the ship against the rocky shoreline, and that sinking feeling that everything was lost all too suddenly proved to be a reality, for many lives were lost that night. That true story and that sinking feeling resulted in Philip Bliss, one of the greatest American hymn writers of hymns that have remained to this day, resulted in Philip Bliss in 1871 penning words to a hymn that has been sung the world over since. "Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the wave, some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save." When Peter walked on the water towards Jesus, he could well have been fainting and struggling when he saw the wind and felt the waves around his feet, and when he began to sink, when he had that sinking feeling that he was about to go under. And that sinking feeling is the theme for our reflections this week as we once again dive into the exciting narrative of Peter walking on the water towards Jesus and Peter walking on the water back to the boat with Jesus. And we want to commence our reflections today by considering the fact that that sinking feeling that Peter had and that we may well have in our lives brings us to a place of questioning. That sinking feeling can bring us to a place of questioning. You see, the very place where Jesus had invited Peter to come to step out the boat and to walk on the water, was the very place where Peter would sink. You don't sink unless you're in water. You cannot sink anywhere else. And yet Jesus had commanded Peter, had invited Peter to step out of the boat. And here was Peter, thinking he was doing so well until he saw the wind and felt the waves, and he then had that sinking feeling and began to sink. Peter could well have been forgiven for saying to Jesus, "Look, Jesus, I think you've got this wrong. You should not have invited me to step out the boat. This is not right. I've taken the wrong step here. You've got it wrong, Jesus. You shouldn't have said to me to get out the boat." A mistake? No. For it's often in life and in our Christian experience that Jesus brings us to the storms of life. He invites us to step out, as it were, onto the raging sea, to that place where we will sink, so that when we do, we can then put our trust and our dependency upon Jesus. You see, if we did not have those sinking feelings, would we really depend on Jesus to the extent that we do? If we thought we could walk on water literally, and if we didn't sink, we would think, well, we can do this without the need for Jesus. But Peter discovered that it was only when he had that sinking feeling that actually he needed Jesus, and in those moments he cried out to Jesus. And so that sinking feeling can bring us to a place of questioning, where we step out, as it were, of our boat in response, yes, to what Jesus has perhaps commanded, invited, challenged us to do. And all of a sudden we find ourselves floundering, struggling, sinking, questioning God. God, have you got this right? Am I really the right person for this ministry? I think you've made a mistake somewhere. No, God never makes mistakes. And it may be today that he has invited you to step out of your boat. You have done that. And you're perhaps floundering, struggling, sinking in the waves of the situation that you find yourselves in. But here's the thing, that God has brought you into that situation so that you may focus on him and not on your own strength. When you walk through the waters, what does God's word say? I will be with you. That sinking feeling, yes, humanly, will bring us to a place of questioning. But that sinking feeling will also bring us to a place where we realize that we cannot do it ourselves, and we have to cry out to Jesus and ask for his help and for his salvation. That's what Peter did when he began to sink. That's what we need to do when we encounter that sinking feeling.